Hi students, it's Miss Duec here to take you through the PowerPoint, what is an ode and how do I read one? I know that odes and poetry are not something that we are often used to doing, and if you don't read poetry, it might be something new for you. But I encourage you to stick with me because there is a beauty in doing things that we don't normally do, especially when every day sort of became, or feels pretty much the same as all of the other days. So I'm going to start off. Here's our week 8 overview. I see a lot of you are viewing it. Nice job. So just like a quick reminder, next week, no new work will be assigned, but we will have Family Circle daily. So make sure you're looking out for that. So the first thing you're going to do this week, you're here, so you've already done it, is you're going to go to the PowerPoint, what is an ode and how do I read one? And that's what we're going to be going through today. So what is an ode? And how do I read one? Let's find out. An ode is a type of poem that's written to praise an important person, event, or item. So important here is kind of relative because, as you'll see, contemporary odes, so that means odes that are written recently, may praise things that are important for the author or the writer, but not necessarily for the people reading the ode. And that's sort of what you guys are going to be doing when we end up with our writing our final piece. Odes are usually written in a hyperbolic or exaggerated way. We're going to come back to that word hyperbole in just a second. And here's the fun roots. The word comes from the Greek word aud. So you can think of audio or audible, and that means voice or to sing. I feel like we've had 18 Greek roots that mean voice, but apparently they really liked voice. Originally, odes were lyrical poems and they were sung out loud. So you can think about the Odyssey, for example, right? The Odyssey was in the oral tradition, and the first thing that Homer or the speaker says is, "Sing to me, O muse," right? Of Odysseus, the man of twists and turns. Things that were sung aloud were really common, and one of the reasons being that not everybody could read, but everybody could listen, and everybody could take part in hearing a song or an ode. So a little bit of vocab here. I think that it's review, but if it's not, you might just want to take some notes to solidify this for yourself. When we talk about the subject of an ode, that's what the poem is celebrating or honoring. So originally, odes were written for grand and complex figures. So you can think of kings, queens, gods, goddesses, but modern day odes are more personal in nature, and we'll get to those. When we talk about a line, we're talking about each row of words. So this is the same in all poetry, and it was the same in the Odyssey. So every line is the row of words. And then a stanza is a group of lines. So you have, in traditional poems, you'll often have a quatrain, which is 4 lines in a stanza and then separated by a blank row and then another 4 lines. You can think of a stanza like a verse in a song or a paragraph in a paper. A lot of times each stanza will sort of have its own idea, and then the next stanza will move to a different idea that's related. Okay, so just fun question here because we do fun things. Homer begins the Odyssey by invoking the muses to sing to him of Odysseus, the man of twists and turns. Do you think that we could consider the Odyssey an ode? I'm curious. I'm wondering. I actually think we could. I had never thought about it like that before, but yeah, it's meant to be sung aloud. The whole thing is about Odysseus, and it is honoring him and speaking of him, even when it talks about things that he's done wrong, right? It still honors the legacy and the story of this man. So I would say, yeah. Yes. Okay. So here we go to the definition of hyperbole. So odes pay tribute to their subject by exaggerating that subject's common qualities. And this literary device is called hyperbole. Hyperbole, not hyperbole, hyperbole. And hyperbole is obvious and intentional exaggeration. So you're exaggerating, but it's obvious, it should be obvious to other people. I am personally somebody that often speaks in hyperbole, but if I were being hyperbolic, I would say I always speak in hyperbole. Always, because I'm exaggerating. Cool. Okay. So some like common hyperboles that people might say, I love pizza more than I love my own children. I hope that's not true. I could do this forever, right? It's very few, especially like if somebody's like riding a roller coaster, like you actually, I don't think you could do that forever. Being hyperbolic. Or watching 90 Day Fiance makes me barf. Again, like hope that's not true, right? That like watching the show actually makes you barf, but you are like exaggerating a feeling of being super uncomfortable with the show. Okay, so now we're going to do my favorite part. We are going to look at an example of an ode. And I picked one that's maybe like a little bit more difficult since we're going to be going through it together. As we read, I want you to look for comparisons and hyperbole. So where is this subject being compared to something else, and where is the subject being exaggerated? And the biggest question that you could think of is just, how is the author helping me see this item or in a new light, in a different way? Okay, so this is called Ode to an Onion. And it's by a poet named Pablo Neruda. And he's one of my favorite poets. And he writes a lot of like sonnets, and he writes a lot of odes, and he writes a lot of free verse things. He's a very, very good, I just love him. Onion, luminous flask, your beauty formed petal by petal. Crystal scales expanded you, and in the secrecy of the dark earth, your belly grew round with dew. Under the earth, the miracle happened, and when your clumsy green stem appeared, and your leaves were born like swords in the garden, the earth heaped up her power, showing your naked transparency. And as the remote sea, in lifting the breasts of Aphrodite, duplicating the magnolia, so did the earth make you, onion, clear as a planet and destined to shine. Constant constellation, round rows of water upon the table of the poor. You make us cry without hurting us. I have praised everything that exists, but to me, onion, you are more beautiful than a bird of dazzling feathers, heavenly globe, platinum goblet, unmoving dance of the snowy anemone, and the fragrance of the earth lives in your crystalline nature. Whoa, like who would have thought that an onion could be so beautiful? This literally makes me want to eat just like caramelized onions, like for the rest of the day. Okay, that was a hyperbole. That was an exaggeration. So we're going to go through this together, thinking about what he does. So when you are reading an ode, you want to look again for like comparisons and hyperbole, because you want to see how this author talks about their subject. What are they saying about the subject of the ode? So the first thing to notice is that Neruda addresses the poem to the onion. He is like speaking to the onion, you onion, right? He uses the second person to talk to the onion. Then he describes the way that the onion looks in an exaggerated or hyperbolic way, right? So he talks about the onion as though it has petals, right? Your beauty formed petal by petal. Crystal scales expanded you, right? So this idea of like that the onion is crystal, it's transparent, it's beautiful. And in the secrecy of the dark earth, your belly grew round with dew. Obviously, this is exaggerated, right? An onion doesn't have petals in the traditional way, right? The leaves of an onion are not like swords in the garden, but he's describing them in this way in order to give the onion some strength, right? So the onion is like delicate up here when we talk about the delicacy of the onion. And then down here, he compares the onion's leaves, so that's the part that sticks out from the top of the onion, to swords in the garden, so giving it a strength there. Later, he compares the onion to Aphrodite herself. A lot of you may have seen this famous picture. It's called The Birth of Venus, and I think it's by Botticelli. And you see that, so like Aphrodite sprung fully formed from the sea. And so he's comparing the onion to Aphrodite, right? It sort of like springs fully formed from the earth. And then he talks about how he compares it to a planet, which I really like, because I guess if you do, like, you peel the onion and you see it's like it's transparent, but it is kind of translucent, I guess, and it does like shine light nicely, which is not something I'd ever thought about an onion before. And then he says, one of the things that he says is that it's a constant food source for the poor. And that's also something that's really important, right? Because I think it goes back to that strength of the swords, where he's talking about, like, not only is it beautiful, but you feed the poor, right? Like on every table of the poor. He is, I'm pretty sure he's Colombian, but I'm gonna have to check on that. But he says, you know, like that there's always a dish with onions on it as a source of food. Onions. Now here, I like this line a lot. He highlights what the onion does for people poetically. You make us cry without hurting us. Yeah, that's right, you know, it's true. And then he finishes the poem by comparing the onion to a bird and the unmoving dance of an anemone. And he highlights the layers in the onion, the beauty of the onion, and the type of movement in the onion. Okay. So this is kind of what a summary of an ode would look like. This is something that you're going to do in the second form, the finding a message. So this is like an example of how you might sort of write about the comparisons in order to find a message. Pablo Neruda's Ode to an Onion uses hyperbole to describe an onion's layers and shape. He compares the onion to a planet, the goddess Aphrodite, and a bird's feathers to help us see the onion's complexity in a new light. He talks about how the onion feeds the poor and makes us cry without hurting us, in order to present the onion as a friend of humanity rather than just a food item. Right? That's a message. It's one of my favorite scenes from any movie. My little brother and I used to quote this to each other like regularly. If you want to click on this link and watch the scene, but basically in Shrek, Shrek does compare ogres to onions, and like for similar reasons, right? Onions have layers. Oh, that was terrible. That was terrible. Oh my God, I'm so sorry, guys. Yeah, so he does also talk about the layers of the onion. So the scene is linked here if you need a little bit of fun in your day. So a little review. Odes are a form of poetry meant to honor a person, a place, or thing. They use comparisons and hyperbole to help the reader see a subject in a new way. They can rhyme. Classical odes often do, or they can be free verse. Modern odes are usually free verse. They can be short or long. And in the coming weeks, you are going to have the chance to honor a common thing in your life by writing, again, either a letter of recommendation or an ode. So you're going to get to choose the form. Okay, so for the rest of the week, now that you've watched this PowerPoint, you can fill out the Google form based on the slides. So that's the first Google form, what is an ode assessment? And then you are going to pick 2 odes to read. So I'm going to show you guys where to find them. If you go here, this is our week 8 overview. It's the first document of the week. And you scroll down, you'll see that we have given you a very large selection of odes to read. You only have to pick 2. So these are contemporary odes, so modern day, more recent ones, and these are pretty easy to read. Not like very easy to read, but they're the easier ones of the ones that we have. So choose a topic and go for it. These are also contemporary odes, but they are a little bit harder to read because they're a little bit more abstract, or the structure is a little more like back and forth. But there's like some really interesting and cool topics in both of them. If you liked Ode to an Onion, you can continue reading some Pablo Neruda. again, a very famous poet, a really beautiful poet, and he wrote a whole book of odes. And he has like Ode to the Dictionary, Ode to My Cat, Ode to My Socks. I really like Ode to Broken Things. I think that it's a very like sweet one. I like it a lot. And if you are really feeling like you want to challenge yourself and you want to know like where these come from, all of these are hard, right? They're like the extra spicy. And these are classical odes. So Sappho and Sophocles were both Greek philosophers and poets. Wordsworth and Keats were romantic poets. So they were British from like the 1700s. Alan Tate is an American poet, and he is from the like late 1800s. Alexander Pope, I think, is from the 1600s, maybe. I think you have to check me up on that. But I think he's also British. And Ralph Waldo Emerson is from like the early 20th century, so the turn of the century. And he often is like very quoted. He's very quotable. So you're gonna pick any two from any category, read them, and then you're gonna do that last Google form, the odes, finding a message, about 2 of them, and then you're done. So thank you for being with me on this journey, and I hope that everybody's week is good. Please remember to come to office hours. We're here for you, and I hope to see you guys soon. Bye.